We lived in Ecuador from 2013 until 2021, at which time we moved to Hawaii. Earlier, I showed some of the festivals of Ecuador that we experienced while there. I would now like to show you some of what living in Ecuador is like from the point of view of an expat. We lived in Cuenca, the third largest city in Ecuador, with a population of approximately 500,000. There are an estimated 10,000 expats living in this city. That means that we are a small enough group that we do not materially change the culture, but there are plenty of English-speaking friends to allow us to pick up the phone and invite somebody to dinner tonight. There are 4 universities in this town, which draws many bright young people. Where you find universities, you often also find music, and Cuenca has an abundance of that. Cuenca has a world-class symphony, and all performances are completely free. In pre-pandemic times, there were 9 performances per year, with expats filling about 1/3 of the seats at the concert hall. A common element to the music scenes in Cuenca is that almost all of it is either free or sometimes a $5 entrance fee. Just outside of Cuenca is a small town which is the heart of guitar making in Latin America. It is an interesting tour that I recommend to anybody who visits here. There is also a jazz club in Cuenca that was originally just half a block from our condo, though they've now moved during the pandemic to a place about a mile away. Music here is always enjoyable, and they have a steady stream of visiting musicians that rotate through the club. There are schools to train young musicians too, so this tradition will likely continue into the future. Art is everywhere in Cuenca. Music is readily available if you seek it, but art hits you in the face wherever you step outside. Cuenca is definitely a city of murals. These murals are spread throughout the city. Some blocks may have a string of half a dozen murals, while other streets only have one. They are even on businesses, who use them to attract attention and add to the artistic environment. Most are whimsical, while others are dreamy. Occasionally there will be political statements, but those are surprisingly rare. Some of the murals are updated every year or so, with new murals painted over old ones. Graffiti is unfortunately becoming a problem, and more so during the pandemic. However, the taggers usually avoid defacing the true art murals. As such, the murals are also put in place to reduce the tagging defacing from delinquents. There is a huge number of art galleries in this town, and there's an art show opening every month throughout the year. When we go to these shows, we are surrounded both by expats and Ecuadorians, all of whom come to enjoy the new art, and of course the free food. The art is inexpensive by U.S. standards. However, with a minimum wage of $500 per month and an average income of $800 per month for Ecuadorians, most do not have the resources to purchase art. Thus, it is mostly expats who do the actual buying at these galleries, though everyone enjoys seeing it. An art piece that might sell for $10,000 in Carmel, California, will go for maybe $800 here. We have become friends with many of these artists shown here, and even own art from some of them. There are also quite a lot of small, purchasable sculptures available in Cuenca. One Cuenca Independence Day, we were exploring a sculpture museum and saw this rather intriguing bicycle, copper-clad and turned into a flower stand. I was intrigued and looked closer. I expected a price of $500 or more, but found the artist was only asking $50. We bought it, and this is now in our living room in Ecuador. We also own these 2 sculptures on our bookcases from other well-known artists who become friends over the years. While there are many places to see and enjoy art, there are also many opportunities to learn how to create art. There are several very high-level painting instructors in town. Many of these classes are plein air, meaning they are taught outdoors, allowing the budding artists to paint what they see directly, rather than from a photograph in a studio. There are also groups that pose for artists to paint or draw rapid portraits during each session. Classes start for children at a young age. Murals are created by spray painting artists. One such famous muralist, the Topher Man, taught a class about graffiti recently. The intent was not to come up with a work of art here, but rather to explore the results obtained from different spray paints and nozzles. Evelyn, my wife for the last 50 years, connected with this artistic community, and her own skills came into bloom under the guiding eyes of some of the instructors in Cuenca. While we lived there, she had her first art showing, followed by several more over our years there. Her shows were all successful, and a large percentage of her work sold in each event. Here's a sampling of some of the art she created while we lived in Cuenca. Art in Ecuador comes in many forms. We have already seen music, painting, murals, and sculpting. There's also live theater available most months of the year. Sometimes it is outdoor theater. Sometimes it is opera. Or stand-up comedy from retired Las Vegas expats. We also have ACT, the Azawai Community Theater. Actors in these frequent plays are expats living in the city. Many of these expats have extensive experience with the Actors Equity Association, having been professional actors before retiring to Cuenca. When we consider theater, we should also remember that a Russian circus came to town several times during our stay. They were a little bit like a three-ring Barnum and Bailey circus, and a little bit like Cirque du Soleil, all done under a big top tent in an empty lot on the edge of town for an entry price of $5. We saw tightrope walkers, high wire, acrobats, and clowns. Since the performers were all Russian, and not likely that many of them spoke Spanish, the entire show was visual with no vocal bantering. That made the show completely understandable regardless of your language skills. Like most of Latin America, Ecuador is a highly Catholic country. Cuenca has a population of roughly 500,000, yet it has 55 Catholic churches. The most impressive Catholic church in town is the Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception, more commonly called the New Cathedral. This cathedral began construction in 1885, but was not completed until 1975. The cathedral sits on the edge of Park Calderon, which is the geographic center of the city. The domes can be seen from almost any place in town and are the most common sight shown on postcards of Cuenca. The towers were renovated in 2019. They now change color of the domes for special events, such as Easter, Ecuadorian Independence Day, or Cuenca Independence Day. Food choices have changed dramatically since 2013, when we first arrived. Back then, it was hard to find very much other than traditional Ecuadorian food. Lunches were commonly about $1.50, and the food was plentiful, but without much style or taste. In recent years, though, more upscale and a wider variety of restaurants now exist. In 2017, I did an informal inventory of restaurants near us, and I discovered we had 93 restaurants within 3 blocks of our condo. We now have 3 sushi restaurants in that range, plus half a dozen pizza places, many burger joints, and many places that serve the kind of upscale food you see here. Street food is popular in Ecuador, and you are really missing out if you don't try it. The most common main courses for street food are pork and cuy. You will often see whole baked pigs on racks. These pigs were cooked overnight in a clay oven or sometimes buried with a delectable mixture of spices. The outer skin is then browned using a handheld propane torch. As you pass by a pork vendor, many will hand you a free sample to try. Each chef has their own recipe, and some really do stand out from the crowd. Order a meal, usually under $5, and get a plate of pork freshly cut off the pig in front of you, plus a small square of skin and then some vegetables on the side. Some Americans are put off when they discover the cuy is actually guinea pigs. Yep, that furry little critter you had as a pet when you were a child is a delicacy in Ecuador. They are raised like chickens in people's backyards for sale at sidewalk cafes and during festivals. After being killed and the fur removed, they have a broomstick shoved through their mouths and out the anus. They are then barbecued while being constantly rotated for about an hour. When we want cuy, we walk down the line of vendors looking for the cuy on the spits. We then return to the vendor with the fattest cuy and buy that specific one. Normally, cuy with side dishes is $12, but the fattest ones go for $15 and is enough to feed a group of 4 people. Wheelbarrow ladies are a common sight in town. They wander around with stacks of the very best fruit, selling at a discount price. Depending on the season, they may have grapes, cherries, strawberries, apricots, or other delicacies. We often buy fruit from these vendors. Farmers markets are a daily experience throughout town, where there are at least 6 such fixed location markets that I know of. We buy our fruits and vegetables at these each week. I go in with 2 cloth bags, fill them until they are as heavy as I can carry, then walk home for 3 blocks, often having spent less than $10 and getting food for a week or more. Though you can buy fish and meat here, I was never brave enough. There's no refrigeration in these markets, and the food just sits on the counter. Ecuadorians tell me it is easy to identify the fresh meat, but they started doing it while clinging to their mother's skirts. I'll stick to the supermarket for those foods. Some vendors in these markets bring their children with them, as seen with this child sleeping in the mother's food cart. After my wife cooked for our first 30 years of marriage, I took up the mantle of dinner chef at home. I am now 20 years into that experience. When I have finished 30 years, we'll decide who does the third 30. We often take cooking classes whenever we travel, and of course that meant I had to take many classes while living in Ecuador that long. I learned how to properly use a long, curved-bladed kitchen knife. I didn't even know I was doing it wrong until that class. And learned many traditional Ecuadorian dishes. One set of classes we both took was at a local culinary academy, where there were also classes for children. Twice a week, there is an animal market in Cuenca that runs from 6 a.m. until noon. Our first visit was at 11 a.m. since I hate mornings. Nope, it was pretty empty by then. We returned another day at 6 a.m. for another market and saw the activity. This is where mostly cows and pigs are sold, but there are also some sheep, ducks, and other livestock. Some of these are sold for breeding, but many will find themselves at a butcher shop within a short time. There are also other specialty markets that usually pop up during various festivals. You can find various artisanal foods or crafts. Since music is so universal, you can usually find somebody selling instruments they have made too. Our Spanish never got as good as we would have liked while living in Ecuador. Nevertheless, we made some Ecuadorian friends. Some spoke a smattering of English, and we would both struggle with this other's language. Some spoke no English at all, but were friendly and willing to wait while we struggled to turn our thoughts into Spanish. We were invited to several Ecuadorian home parties over the years. As you might expect from the other things said so far, these parties largely revolved around food and music. This was the first time we had experienced cooking cuy, or guinea pig, ourselves. It involved lengthy turning of the cuy over the barbecue while drinking a steady supply of beer. After dinner, the whole family would gather around while various members would play their musical instrument of preference and occasionally sing. Ecuador is more than just the city of Cuenca, though. We have Ecuadorian driver's licenses and rented a car for 2 or 3 weeks each year to explore other parts of the country. One place we returned to repeatedly was the Ecuadorian coast, particularly to the fishing villages in the middle of the coastal region. Midday would usually find kids playing soccer or just goofing off, all welcomed our camera, and some hams would come over and pose. The boats often made for excellent photographic subjects. At the right time of the year, you can go slightly off the coast and watch whales breaching as they swim past. As the small fishing boats land with their catch in their bottoms, frigate birds descend like a scene from a horror movie. The birds are looking for a quick meal. The fishermen are paid by the pound of fish they deliver to the ice trucks up the road across 50 yards of beach. Thus, every fish a bird steals reduces the fisherman's income. They wave their hands to scare the birds away, to little effect. Some run in pairs, with one waving his hands to scare the birds while a second carries the fish. In this arms race, one fisherman put a tarp over the fish, yet this bird, while still flying, lifted the tarp and stole a fish anyway. Sharks are still harvested in Ecuador. Here is a man whose specialty is to go down the row of sharks and cut off their fins. There are also a small army of people on the beach who prepare the fish for immediate cooking. When you eat at a restaurant at one of these beaches and you order fish, it's as fresh as it can get. The Galapagos Islands are famous for being the place where Darwin studied and first came up with his theory of evolution. We first went there in 1999 for a 3-day excursion because I'm not fond of boats and thought I would be bored. I was wrong. and we regretted not staying longer. Therefore, we returned in 2009 for 10 days and loved it. Our third trip was in 2019, when we gave a trip to Galapagos to our niece and nephew as college graduation presents. They asked us to join them, which we were eager to do. Most of the animals found on these islands are found nowhere else in the world. Since all hunting is prohibited, these animals never learn to fear humans. You can walk right up to them and photograph a bird nesting on her eggs within a few inches without her flinching. The Sally Lightfoot crab is a small red crab that scurries over the rocks and is ubiquitous along the rocky shoreline. It became one of my favorite photo subjects. Of course, the seals are everywhere, and you often had to step over them to avoid hurting a baby that had laid down right in front of you. At one point, a curious seal tried to eat my tripod. As dusk approaches, the island birds take to the air to feast on the insects that arise at that time. We live in the south of Ecuador, but took a couple of trips to the north part of the country with interesting experiences. The first was to a chocolate plantation, where we learned how the bean is grown and what it looks like. Then how it is processed into the chocolate we eat as a snack. Just over the border into Colombia and a 10-minute taxi ride is the Las Lejas Sanctuary. This Gothic-style church took 33 years to build and was completed in 1949. Pilgrims from Colombia and Ecuador come here due to the legend of an apparition of the Blessed Mary appearing here in the 18th century. Tomba is a small town in the very north of Ecuador, famous mostly for the topiaries in the main city cemetery. The caretaker in the early 20th century loved topiary creations and filled the cemetery with them. His sons now carry on that tradition. Ecuador is a poor country and many people cannot afford a burial plot. The solution is to rent space in a tomb wall. Each slot is just large enough to slide a body into. As long as the rent is paid on the spot, the person's body remains there. If the rent goes unpaid, though, the body is removed and put into a mass grave, and a newly dead person gets a slot. Additionally, we stopped by the Swing at the End of the World in Baños. This is a swing that goes out over an 8,530-foot drop, allowing the rider to feel like they are in space while looking out over Mount Tungurahua. There is one well-known Aztec ruin near town called Ingapirca. Though it is nothing like Machu Picchu in Peru, it is an interesting day trip from the city. We have been to the Ecuadorian Amazon 3 times. The first was to the Napa Lodge. While that was our favorite location in the Amazon, the trip was before I started in photography, so I have no images to show. Our third trip was to support a charity, which we will discuss later. This trip was to Macas, a small city deep in the Amazon, where we met with a family dressed in native garb for our visit. They painted us in the traditional Quechua manner, gave us a traditional and very minimal meal, and generally introduced us to their culture. There are a few botanical gardens in Ecuador, as flowers are prized and sold in every market. Ecuagenera is the largest orchid producer in Ecuador and is only a few miles outside of Cuenca. This is a family-owned orchid plantation with the goal of producing orchids for sale and also for research. They claim to have over 10,000 species of orchids on their property, some of which are up in the hills in hidden and secured locations. There are also some zoos and animal habitats in Ecuador. Just outside Cuenca is the Amorazu Zoo, which is not like any you have probably seen before. Ecuador is generally not handicap friendly, and this zoo takes that to an extreme. You climb up and down steep dirt paths that are downright treacherous after a rain. The animals are mostly in large fenced areas where they have pens that represent their home ranges as much as possible. Some areas allow the animals to roam freely. I was told not to approach the animals, but one pocket monkey climbed up on my neck. I was worried the staff would be unhappy, but as soon as I left the monkey area, he hopped off and went to the next victim. We visited a butterfly farm and had a wonderful time wandering among the butterflies, including watching and photographing, of course, those just emerging from their chrysalis. There was also a series of hummingbird feeders just outside the butterfly enclosure. I sat for more than an hour entranced by the dozens of hummingbirds that came and went, and caught a few photographs I liked. There are many small day trip tours available to those that are willing to reach out and find them. One such was to a nearby bird of prey sanctuary that puts on a weekly demonstration as a fundraiser. Everyone in our group was allowed to launch a bird of prey from our outstretched arms and then recover the bird after it had been fed a treat by the trainer. I've seen various bird of prey demonstrations over the decades, but this one was unique in that the small audience was allowed to fully participate. Another day trip tour available is the Devil's Nose train. Ecuador's train system is quite remarkable. For the workers and engineers to have created a viable passage from Quito to Guayaquil over a century ago with the technology available at the time is nothing less than heroic. The track goes over rocky ravines, along raging rivers, through dense cloud forests and around mountains. But by far the most impressive section is the so-called Devil's Nose, a hair-raising trip down the rocky slopes of the Andes through some of Ecuador's most breathtaking scenery. Most of the country's train system has fallen into disrepair, but this train still runs daily, mostly for tourists. There are numerous other small tours we took here and there over the 8 years of living in Ecuador. We walked long distances daily when doing these. We visited one place that cut up sugar cane to make sugar. The output was bricks of sugar that could be purchased in local markets or is sold to manufacturers for use in chocolate treats. I have no useful experience with fishing, but I did spend one day learning fly fishing from a master and came home with 2 nice trouts for dinner. We occasionally do pro bono work for charities that we believe are good. Centrandes is a mobile surgery unit that travels around the remote reaches of Ecuador, providing free surgery for those who have serious problems and cannot afford or cannot reach a doctor. It is entirely organized and run by Ecuadorians. We were the only expats on the trip. In 2014, their mobile surgery truck was 20 years old, and they needed a new truck. They launched an aggressive fundraising campaign in the U.S., and I offered to provide photographs to help with that campaign. The staff consists of 6 Ecuadorian-based surgeons, plus another half-dozen volunteers from around the world. The latter are often medical students, doing this to gain world experience as part of their training. Here are some of the hero surgeons who donated their time and money to help those who would otherwise go untreated. This group of medical professions spend time every month going somewhere to help those who cannot afford to pay for normal medical care. When the pandemic hit, they could no longer travel, but continued to do surgery in Cuenca for the poor here. For me, the real treat was being allowed into the surgery room. I had to stay in one corner, fully outfitted in a surgical gown, and could not use any flash. Nevertheless, it was an opportunity I'd never expected to have in my lifetime, and I loved many of the images from those days. The founder of the group did make a trip to Stanford, Harvard, and other top medical study locations, and our photos helped them obtain the $250,000 needed for a new surgery vehicle. That wraps up our presentation of life in Ecuador from the view of an expat. This was a wonderful place to live, and we will never regret going there upon retirement. Saving money in the early retirement years was a plus, but the real gains came from exploring a non-U.S. country far more completely than we ever could have done before. We found the people to be universally friendly. I cannot remember an unkind Ecuadorian all those years. The culture was different enough to be interesting, but not so much as to be uncomfortable. If you have a chance to visit Ecuador, please try to give it more than just a couple of weeks. There is so much to explore and discover here.